It is time. I feel it in my bones. Enough to make my systems blow. Welcome to the new age. Welcome to the mini playthrough of the Poison Necro.
All who oppose me, beware.
Now, to start off, you have the trusty Skelly from the +1 to raise skeleton wand, which will get you out into the wilderness and up to level 2. At level 2 though, you're left stranded. That's because the first poison skill, that being Poison Dagger, is quite inexplicably a level 6 skill. Till then, there are 3 routes that I can take. Number 1, be a boring Bonemancer and put points into teeth till level 6 and then respec. Second, be the same old Summonmancer and put points into raise skeleton till level 6 and then respec. Or 3, and this is the one that gets my testosterone glands going, put points into dexterity and be a man. The only problem being that you're not really good at it with this guy. Oops. Whatever. I'll be a woman instead. Buy some javelins from Charcy along with some estrogen, and I present to you the Javamancer. All jokes aside, javelins are really broken and really easy way to start off any character, no matter how much physique, FHR, or IAS frames they lack. Throw damage from javelins is nuts early game. To be fair, this is Den of Evil. Cold Plains is considerably scarier. I mean, that's why they put Flavy there to warn you. You came to the wrong waypoint, fool. That's what Flavy says, right? Something like that. Here though, our Javamancer is putting in work. I mean, look at this. This guy cleared out the den easier than the Summonmancer even could. That's impressive. Problem is that the joy is only going to be short-lived, and so is the damage output. This really shows in the next quest of Blood Ravens. In my opinion, an essential quest because of the lack of your damage. You really do need that mercenary early on. Also, in my opinion, a very difficult quest because, well, the lack of your damage. Seriously, I've given complex linear algebra tests that were easier than this fight. There are so many variables here. You have to hit Blood Raven, who is a constant moving target. You have to not get hit by her because she hurts. Then you have to do this quickly because otherwise she'll keep raising her minions and swarming me. In the end, I found the solution that I just bought a shit ton of javelins from all the gold that I had gotten from the den drops and then went ballistic, hitting everything that moved. Killing her minions made it honestly a lot easier and clearer to aim at her, and thus I was able to get her in the end. Now from that we can get a nice cold mercenary, but our troubles are far from solved. Our damage is still very much lacking as shown by this Goat Clan boss fight here, and the main reason is due to the lack of skills. Thankfully, Stonyfield houses the perfect super unique you can farm to get to level 6 easy, Rakanishu. More commonly known as Rek-Anishu, this guy can be vicious if you get caught up in his lightning bolts, but thankfully my strat with this Necro till now has been to stand back and blindly fire javelins anyways, which is actually one of the most effective ways of killing him. Speaking of effective, the XP you get from him is really good, and within a few runs I was already up to level 6. Ready to equip a dagger from Charcy and ready to put points into my skills, 1 point into Poison Dagger and 1 point into Corpse Explosion. Oh baby, we are a Necromancer now. It's not all plain sailing just yet. Poison Dagger is good, but is nothing more than a gimmick in front of large monster packs, so gas potions, the mercenary, and corpse explosions are my main source of damage here. Corpse explosion is still level 1, so the range is puny, and it also takes up all my mana because all my stat points up to now have been invested into dexterity. Still, pushing with what I had to work with, I made it to the Black Marsh. Here I noticed that my mercenary had cold damage on her, which is not ideal because that shatters corpses, and all I want to do right now is corpse explode everything. Now, Chinmay, you might say, I thought this video was going to be about a Poison Necro. When are you gonna stop focusing on corpse explosion and use the Poison Dagger skill you also have? Well, for those people, I have a couple of clips of me attempting to use Poison Dagger in the Countess Tower. Here is one when I tried to Poison Dagger against some nice friendly ghosts. Yup, that went well, right? With Corpse Explosion on the other hand, much better. Here's another clip of me Poison Daggering a lightning enchanted archer. Yup, sick time to level by the way. Overall though, you see what I mean. So yeah, Corpse Explosion, it's so great. Especially once I leveled up and put more points into it. It really brings back the you see one corpse and it's like shark tasting blood type of feeling. Everything falls soon after that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still do use Poison Dagger. I skilled that alongside Corpse Explosion to level 9 and will be putting points into it first, always, so it does do good damage to get the first kill or help me against bosses like the Countess. Speaking of the Countess, this is where I spent a little bit of time farming runes and levels. At first I was really not sure about what runes to get and what rune words to make, but as I planned and thought about more future scenarios, this is what I settled on. First is the obligatory Tal-Eth for stealth. Wait, where'd I put it? Oh, right here, yeah. Now this Countess session took a bit of a while because of some runes which I will go over in a little while, but we can't just jump over one of the best budget armors now, can we? The faster run walk was a huge saving grace the last few Countess runs, cutting the time of those down by a lot. The FHR is always nice, especially for someone as frail as the Necro, and the FCR, though not very important right now, will come in handy when I switch to Poison Nova and Corpse Explosion full time in the future. Something that will also come in handy later is some helmet gear that I have collected here. A few Rald runes for some fire res for me and my mercenary, and also this, Nadir. This is the first time that I think I've ever made this rune word, I think, but with this guy, I think that the Cloak of Shadows will come in very handy in something like Chaos, while I'll be waiting to get a few corpses going. One of the ways I plan to get said corpses is through the help of my future Act 2 mercenary, and for him I have prepared here the ingredients for the rune word Malice, which does work in polearms and spears and will provide him with some nice melee stuff down the road. For now, the pesky L rune is the reason I am level 17 right now. Now with that, I have pretty much stuck to the same skill distribution as before, going a little heavier on Poison Dagger as you can see, because it does start to do some pretty respectable damage. I mean, 129 to 153? That's not trump change, especially in Act 1 normal, and it does help withering away the monsters. I'll try to primarily use it as far as I can in the difficulty. Corpse Explosion is obviously the backup and a skill that you can always count on having your back. Though it is considerably worse at the moment compared to when the monsters will start having higher HP in later difficulties. So yeah, with that I'm doing good damage with my skills, have nice armor with stealth. Pretty much the only upgrade I'm looking forward to next is some nicer mana potions. For that, let's go to Act 2 through the gatekeeper called Endariel. My initial plan was to blow her up, quite literally. I mean, her poison res is maxed out, so I thought Poison Dagger would not do good, and her fire res is minus 50, so I thought Corpse Explosion would do a lot, except it didn't really work out that way. Corpse Explosion at this stage of the game just isn't strong enough to do significant damage to much higher health monsters like Andy here, and thus I had to abandon the plan altogether when I saw that it had taken me nowhere. From there I used a wand with +2 to Iron Maiden and a clay golem to distract her. Do some damage back with the Iron Maiden curse, but the main carry here actually was Poison Dagger. The damage wasn't amazing because I was only hitting her so often since she did a lot back to me, but it was significant enough to finally take her down. With Andy and Act 1 down, I could buy some decent-ish mana potions in Act 2, which felt really good. What also felt good was to get a good attacking mercenary, an Act 2 offensive mercenary with Blessed Aim and Malice to go along with him. Going forward, he was going to be a big part of my damage dealing plans, like in the Halls of the Dead. Here you can see in essence how I play with this guy facing large clusters. I use Poison Dagger on one skeleton and wait. They all stare back at me, bewildered at my inaction, till one falls, and after that, bewilderment turns into death. Beautiful. One place this is not so effective is the narrow corridors of Maggot Lair. Here I have to rely on my mercenary most of the time to get kills in quick successions of the monsters that literally block your path. Arcane is pretty much the same. Sure, you can Poison Dagger and Corpse Explode here too, but because monsters are not in clusters, you don't get the full effect of the AoE of Corpse Explosion. Speaking of Corpse Explosion not being useful, the Duriel fight. Thankfully, we remember that we're a Necromancer and there has always been a way to kill Duriel, been engraved in our DNA since birth: Iron Maiden plus Clay Golem. The strat is extremely effective and I am very glad because having to painfully slowly stab Duriel with Poisonous Dagger as he ripped through me with his Holy Freeze would not have been much fun. This, on the other hand, gets the job done quite well. Now Act 3 and the Flare Jungle really made me wonder if I had done something wrong with my gear because my Necro took a lot of damage and his faster hit recovery seemed awful. Then I was reminded that it was the build to blame, not so much the gear. I was playing a melee Necromancer, which was definitely a first and thus had to lunge into large packs of flares. That obviously was dangerous and my luck was going to run out at some point, and I succumbed to the lack of movement due to my pathetic FHR frames. This really highlighted two things. Number one, I was playing my mercenary wrong. You saw that in the last clip how he was far away from me and unable to help me / provide a corpse with which I could explode the screen, so I had to play running behind him more often than not, and one way that was possible was to strategically place clay golems to attract enemies towards him. Number two is the simple fact that this is how effective Poison Dagger has become now. Before I used to one-tap monsters and they used to bleed to death automatically, which served as a perfect serviceable skill to the first kill of the chain. Poison Dagger had definitely fallen behind now and I had to recognize that. One argument that can be made is that it would do more damage if I took points out of Corpse Explosion and put it into its synergy of Poison Explosion. Well, the problem with that is that neither will be able to do this inside of a room this effectively and this quickly. That was Serena, by the way, a familiar spot for my normal characters as I like to take a breather here and just farm her for a while till level 24 to equip a teleport staff and also gather some gold to buy said teleport staff since I had kinda lost all of mine in a recent accident. Here I executed the Clay Golem plan. As you can see, letting my mercenary get the first kills with his effective Malice weapon and then go in with Corpse Explosion. I still did put points into Poison Dagger because I do recognize that going forward my mercenary's damage is going to remain the same, but the difficulty will demand more. To combat that, I also found a very helpful drop on the last run I turned level 24. A unique Chris from Serena herself, the Jade Tan Doe. Attack rating, poison damage, and resistance, and cannot be frozen. So basically a poisonous dagger. If only I knew someone who could use one of those. I'll have to wait a bit to use it though, because as you saw the dexterity requirement was high. Till then, let's go kill Mephisto now that we're all grown up and level 24 and everything. Mephisto actually responds surprisingly well to the Iron Maiden plus Clay Golem plus Mercenary plus Poison Dagger treatment. Unlike Duriel, he has a lot more special elemental based attacks that don't do damage back to him with Iron Maiden, so I had to spawn the Clay Golem close to him to make sure that he smacked him to death, but it worked pretty well here. Not to mention the occasional bitch stabs that my Necro put in with the Poison Dagger, and the open wounds caused by my Mercenary early in the fight, that residual damage adds up and complements the consistent Iron Maiden damage, as low as it may be, quite well, and it was what allowed me to take down Mephisto relatively risk-free. That formula worked pretty well against Izzy as well, although not as well as I hoped. Here you can see in this clip I was constantly stabbing at this dude because I did not respect his damage output as much, and I guess that's why he didn't take much back from Iron Maiden either. Either that or most of his damage is cold based, but whatever. Another monster down, another job well done. You can add the Hephasto fight to that list as well. This guy, crumbled almost instantly, and yeah, I think that's because he had fanaticism and so high damage that Iron Maiden was super effective against it, and it only took one poison tick and a few golems to finish him off. The rune that we get from normal Hellforge is largely irrelevant since we'll be running Nightmare Countess anyways. What is relevant though is the CS. Now here against Infector, I summoned him kinda unprepared because my initial plan was to have a bunch of corpses near him and blow his group up as soon as they came out. Due to lack of recent experience, I forgot which seal let him out, and then this Looney Tunes chase sequence commenced. It still worked out alright though. You can see I followed pretty much the same plan, just using some of the older corpses to pop them instead of the freshly created ones like I had planned. For Decise and his boys, the trick is always separation. They're very codependent on each other, and if you can get his minions away from his fanaticism, they're not so tough, so I could Poison Dagger one and let the Mercenary kill him and then Corpse Explosion away. With fanaticism, they would have just murked my Mercenary, so I had to be careful. Decise then, without his minions, is no trouble either. Same with Vizier. Now granted, blowing him up is considerably difficult since he is outright fire immune, so he doesn't take nearly as much from Corpse Explosion. My Mercenary was able to come in though and handle that. You can see that Malice is paying dividends here, even though if it took like 2 hours for me to farm the L rune for it. Speaking of 2 hours, the Diablo Fight. Well, it wasn't that long really, but it definitely was prolonged a bit by this little incident. Yeah, normal Diablo is ruthless. Thankfully I was using my Iron Maiden wand in the offhand and thus had the teleport staff in my cube so I could use it and a bit of pause buffering to get back to the CS. There the fight resumed and it went on and on and on. The idea was the same as the Mephisto one. Iron Maiden and Clay Golem plus me et tu bruting Diablo in the back over and over again, expecting his HP to go down. It did, but it sure did take a long time. However, when it was done, I guess I could say proudly, Lord Diablo, I had bested you with Poison Dagger. Imagine dying to a meme. Seriously though, the unsung hero of this battle were the Clay Golems. I mean, look at all that clay here. Iron Maiden was absolutely crucial here, but Poison Dagger did get the final blow, so we take those. We won't be able to take those for long though, since the difficulty was ramping up, and thus I decided to stop for another little leveling spree at Eldritch. Now I went into this almost at level 26 and wanted to continue this till level 30 and basically till I had access to Poison Nova. Once I got to level 26 though, I first got to use my unique Chris, and using this, let me show you what an average Eldritch run looked like. Here I found some rancid gas potions as well, and those are the first thing I threw at the pack to get the passive damage ticking. Then I spawned a Clay Golem to lure them, and then get one corpse with Poison Dagger and my Mercenary, and you know the rest. These runs are fast, easy, and effective, and they got me up to like level 28 really quickly. After that, as I tend to do with most melee characters, I moved on to rescue Anya to do Pindle runs to level 30. On the way, I saved some barbarians, and yes, the doors were indeed immune to my attacks. That's why God created mercenaries. Very nice. Now, if you were wondering how this Necro was going to fare against Frozenstein, well, the answer was like he fares against everything else. Good, if you've got a couple of corpses lying around. This reliance of mine on corpse explosion did cost me though, since even after saving Anya, I found it hard to do Pindle runs because getting the first corpse was kind of a challenge. Eldritch Pack does have less XP, but they're also much easier to kill, and more importantly, get a corpse explosion chain going, which I was struggling with here. So I decided at the end to just go back to Eldritch eventually. I was at level 28.5 anyways, and the XP that you get from these guys is not completely terrible, and is perfectly serviceable to get you up to level 30. What's more, I even got a nice blue circlet during the runs, and it actually turned out to be +1 to Necro skills. Of course, knowing my luck, it was ethereal, but it will do, especially since I only need it for a while because I'll get lore once I reach Nightmare anyways. Now with all that Eldritch leveling, I did get to level 30, and then I did unlock the all-important skill of Poison Nova. This is good because it finally adds some AoE to my primary attack and eliminates the need for attack rating. It's not so good because being at level 2, it doesn't do that much damage. One way to mitigate that is to divvy up your skills smartly so that you leave 2 skills at level 29 and at level 30 you can put 1 point into Poison Nova and 1 point into lower res. Making smart decisions though was never my strong suit, thus for compensation I'm using a wand with lower res charges on my main hand. Now I didn't know this, but apparently for a Necromancer this wand only has a level 30 required, whereas for all other characters it is level 36 required. So I can use it now, given that Mala doesn't sell something like +1 to lower resistance, which also would have worked. After I get a point into lower res, after like a respec or whatever, I'll probably resort to using a wand like this, one with +1 to Necromancer skills. Now the alternative to this is to use a 20 FCR wand like the Sanders one I found while Eldritch farming, and this will, along with rings and amulets I found along the way, get me to 75 FCR. I do think though that the +1 to skills will give me more mileage, especially at lower levels when each extra skill point makes a huge difference in damage. That's for later though. For now I did a few normal Countess runs as well to get a tier rune and made my mercenary a strength. I talked about this in my summon Necro where I think I waited till hell to make this thing. This time I'm going to do the complete opposite of that route, and using the Am rune that I found from Hellforge, I made one of these right now because I think that the crushing blow is going to be huge, especially in the upcoming fights. One of those upcoming fights was the Ancients. Now I'm not gonna lie to you guys because I don't do that like all the time. I did not have a plan for this fight. Thus you can see that I just lower res the barbarians in panic and just started going ballistic with Poison Novas. Just spamming the skill while making sure my mercenary stayed alive. Good thing is, it did actually work better than expected. I did get confused with my weapon swaps and skill binds though at some point and decided to take a breather. My mercenary was also low here, but I think we had killed Madoc at this point, which was really nice. Sure enough, his brothers came to make sure that he didn't die in vain, and I went ahead with the explosion of Novas yet again. I have to say that I think my mercenary was doing most of the work here. His crushing blows were coming in huge, and that's what got the Ancients down to such low HP so soon. Corlake being case in point. Talek was being a bit feisty, his whirlwinds were hurting, so I decided in the end to get some distance from him, and my mercenary and a bit of poison damage from Nova finished him off as well. Now one thing that my Necro does do a lot better than my mercenary is AoE damage, and the fight with wave 4 shows this, especially with corpse explosion at the end. Unfortunately, I was not able to replicate the result with wave 5 because, well, they're wave 5. They also happen to be extra fire resistant, so even corpse explosion doesn't work too well against them. So even though I did try for a while, leading them out, exploding every corpse I could find, leaving them be was the best course of action in the end. Then we had Bale. Now Crushing Blow came up huge here. It genuinely took a fight that could have taken ages and made it take like a tenth of the age's time. Even though the mercenary did good work here, the problem was he would often get KO'd quickly by Bale, so I had to run back to town and get him back. It was worth it though. I mean, just look at how much of his HP he just hacked off right there. And that is that Crushing Blow from strength paying dividends right there. I also figured out that the timing of placing clay golems next to Bale to stop attacking the mercenary, and thus with that and some Poison Nova ticks, I was able to kill him eventually. Now going into Nightmare, the first task in hand was to clear the den and get a respec because the lower res wand was draining my gold quick. It was working pretty well though. As you can see, I was leveling and putting points into Poison Nova now. It had started to do some respectable damage. Corpse Explosion still though was the main star of the show. My mercenary helped out as well, his Crushing Blow damage holding strong against Corpse Fire zombos, and I was able to complete this quest cleanly. This got me the respec I was after, and finally I could put a hard point into lower res and get rid of the wand with the charges. I could also put a cool 10 points into Corpse Explosion and then dump all the rest into Poison Nova and its synergies. This time I went ham on Poison Explosion. That's because I think it would have been criminal of me to have a Poison Necro mini playthrough and not even try this thing out. To be honest, I was quite excited for it since the poison part of the Poison Explosion was really good, it doing poison damage in the thousands. The explosion part, yeah, that was not even there. The main problem with this skill is really its lack of AoE. All it does is create a giant poison cloud over an exploded dead body, whereas maybe it's my fault to expect that. I was thinking that it was going to be like a cousin to Corpse Explosion, just doing poison damage instead of fire and physical. That does not hold true as it lacks that chain ability that makes Corpse Explosion so great. This fight with Blood Raven is a perfect example. As you can see, it does do great poison damage when you stand in the poison cloud. Thing is, it does nothing outside of that, whereas Corpse Explosion does this. So yeah. So with the help of CE and Poison Nova, for the most part, I made it to the Countess Tower. The Necro actually really does well here because he has a lot of AoE damage and really feasts on the corpses of the various boss packs you encounter. The only drawback here are my hirelings are a bit frail. Let's see if we can solve that with a bit of Countess farming. Through the aforementioned farming, I was able to acquire a few gear updates, and it all starts right here. Dole IO White Wand. This is an essential piece of equipment for all my Necros. The 20 FCR and the +3 to poison and bone skills are just too good to give up. The only thing that really differs for the 3 different Necromancers is the base of the wand. For a boner, you really want a base with +3 to bone spear. The Summon Mancer appreciates +3 to raise skeleton very much. With this guy though, you can't get a base with +3 to Poison Nova, or even +3 to lower res. That's because both those skills are level 30 and Drognin in Act 2 normal only sells white base wands with up to level 18 skills. Now you can find +3 to Poison Nova bone wands with sockets like if you just get lucky, but less that happens, your options are limited. One of those is this thing that the game tried to bait me with, +3 to Corpse Explosion, and it came with 2 sockets as well. However, I made the conscious decision to not go with it because my offense is doing really well as is. What I'm struggling with at the moment, and is something that I touched on before too, are my defenses. Necro being a frail glass shard doesn't help me, and my mercenary really does not have the gear to take on entire boss packs by himself. I mean, you can see here, he's rocking the scythe with albeit a really good rune word, but due to the lack of damage from his base, his lifesteal is pretty much non-existent. So is the rest of his gear. I mean, Ral is cheap and it works, but it is nothing more than serviceable. Same with Saigon's chestplate, which is something I found for him doing the Countess runs. Therefore, I needed another meat shield pretty much to tank damage for me, and thus I turned towards Clay Golem. The base for this wand has +3 to Clay Golem and +1 to Golem Mastery, which provides him with some much needed life and increased slowness to enemies, which in turn allows him to survive longer. Now, maybe this was a mistake. I mean, I could have saved up my socket quest from normal for another piece of gear, but I decided to invest a bit in this plan and hopefully it will make my Necro overall a bit tankier. Now from that interesting wand choice, we move on to some more standard ones like lore. Ort Sol in a 2 open socket mask, which provides me with +1 to skills, 30 lightning res and 10 to energy. All of which are excellent additions for any caster's arsenal. Also another great addition for that are some FCR pieces. I mentioned that the wand gives me 20, so I dedicated all my jewelry towards it as well. This amulet actually is quite nice and I found it in normal Countess Tower, believe it or not. The rings are more standard, 10 FCR apprentice rings, but they do the job as they get me over the 48 FCR breakpoint. That's all I really need at this point. 75 with Poison Nova is not something I feel like is required, and it helps because in my armor slot I can then use something like smoke. Yeah. Farming Nightmare Countess also took a good while, this time due to a surprising lack of Dole runes, but I ended up farming 3 extra IOs, which I cubed up to a lum and made smoke for the 20 FHR, 10 energy and massive 50 all res. Now this armor helps me twofold. If I ever want to do something like switch back to stealth for the 75 FCR breakpoint, this would work really well on my mercenary and give him some much needed resistances. Secondly, what I'm using it for right now is a substitute for my Ancient's Pledge, which you may have also noticed is in my stash, so I can use this mummified trophy instead. +3 to Poison Nova. No frills, no gimmicks, what you see is what you get, and what you get is a lot of damage. I mean, this is what the Necro is all about. Stacking up mad amounts of plus skills to boost up your damage, and this definitely does help, taking my damage up to 1277 to 1391 from Poison Nova. Yeah, I remember the days of Act 5 normal when this thing did like 200 damage and I was worried. Yeah, those are long gone now. This skill hurts now, so good. Now this is the gear piece that I would have saved the socket quest for, you know, to make something like a rhyme in this for more resistances, and even cannot be frozen, but I've decided to just let it be for now and I'll see what I'll do going into hell. For now we have some basic lower thirds gear with 20 faster run walk trying to fill in the shoes, pun intended, of the faster run walk that I lost by taking off my stealth. For my belt I have a very basic Demon Height sash with 17% FHR, which lands me awkwardly 2% below the 39 breakpoint, which I'll try to get with some charms in the future. For now the Demon Height really helps out by letting me get 4 rows of potions, which may sound like a little thing, but having that extra row of mana, especially when you're using mana intensive attacks like Poison Nova and Corpse Explosion, is just so nice. Finally, we have gloves, which are nothing special, just 12% fire res, which brings my overall resistance situation to a pretty respectable level. The charms contribute to this as well, as they provide me with some light resistances and some other stats as well, like faster run walk, dexterity and life. Overall, my resistances are pretty nice, especially considering that I'm not using Ancient's Pledge in Nightmare. The benefit of which is of course the extra damage from my Necro head in my offhand, which really shows in the stat screen. Also, another contributor to this number is the fact that I am level 45 because of all that Countess grinding, and thus the sheer number of skill points I have invested is greater as well. Speaking of skill points, let's run them down quickly as well because they're pretty basic. Starting from the top, in the summoning tree I have 1 point in Clay Golem. The rest of the bonuses that I get are from my plus skills, and it just helps that this guy gains more life as the difficulty increases as well. That makes him great against melee attackers, but he does struggle against elemental damage. Solely for that I have considered putting 1 point into summon resist. However, I think I'm going to resist on that till I get another skill that will benefit from that as well, like revives. In the poison and bone tree I have my main damaging skill of Poison Nova, which does pretty nice damage as illustrated before. I still have the same number of skill points invested in the synergies as before, and my corpse explosion with all the plus skills is sitting at an ecstatic 11 as well, which is pretty much all the radius that I need for now. Going forwards though, I do suspect my reliance on this skill to be greater, and thus I will probably focus on this before maxing Nova's synergies. Anyways, while we're here, I also want to talk about an alternative path that you can take with this guy. That is, instead of going with Clay Golem for your defense, you can invest points into Bone Wall and Prison to protect you against and lure enemies as well, and then go to town with Poison Nova and Corpse Explosion. That would work really well as well, quite like how I played my Bone Necro. That's also why I didn't go for it this time, to separate this guy a bit from his boner counterpart. Finally, we have curses, and the only thing worth noting here is the 1 hard point into lower res. Pretty much the only curse I will be using from here on out. That doesn't really mean that I would be putting points into it or anything. I mean, even at level 2 it provides minus 34 res, which is plenty, and there is a pretty steep diminishing return for curses anyways, so this will probably stay the same level throughout but still do the work. Let's test the output of said work, and what better testing ground than Andariel's Playground, Catacombs 4. Now, to be fair, this particular character is not great for killing single targets, especially not when they are giant babes with maxed out poison res. Not that you could have guessed that by watching this fight. The reason for that is because the MVP here was 100% Zanahari. IDKY, Andy was just not targeting him. I like to think that it was because of my intelligent and frequent placement of Clay Golems, which were slowing her down effectively while I peppered her with Poison Novas and lower res, but he was probably bugged, and why he was just able to go to town with crushing blows. Those pay huge dividends, and even though I was not able to find a good damage dealing weapon for him, this shows 2019 Shinmei. This is why you make this rune word as early as possible. It puts in work. Maggot Lair in Nightmare is way better than it was in normal. Now granted, my AoE spell of choice, Poison Nova, is hindered in its spread here, but just a little bit still helps out. And of course, Corpse Explosion. Not to mention that lower res boosts it up as well, since part of it is fire damage. Not that it needs boosting, I mean, just look at this. Snake Temple can be scary though, and for good reason. This is where investing in that Clay Golem really came in handy for bait, as he stuck around for a while to let Poison Nova do its job. Really didn't even need Corpse Explosion for this one. Still wanted to use it though because, you know, feels good. A place where Corpse Explosion is definitely needed is the Tal Rasha's tomb, because the inside of this place looks like that one mod where you turn the monster density up to 11,000. Look at this. Now granted, this wasn't lethal for my Necro because most of the enemies were frail skeletons. My mercenary was not so lucky as he succumbed to the ogres. Remember those guys? Yeah, we'll see him in a bit. Not for Nightmare Dury though. For him, I'm going in with the one and only source of crushing blow, my mercenary, and hoping that he can do the work. Good news, he did. In conjunction with strategically placing Clay Golems and my constant sparks of Poison Nova and lower res, we were able to keep Duriel down. Yes, he did eventually get to feast on my mercenary, but at that point he was at low enough health that I was confident in Poison Nova's ability to get the job done with all of its 1300 damage glory, plus lower res. It puts in work. One place where it even outshines Corpse Explosion is the Flare jungle against said flares. That's because these guys don't have much health and are generally scattered and running around the whole time, which are both bad for Corpse Explosion, but good for Poison Nova, so along with lower res, it is very helpful here. I mean, don't get me wrong, Corpse Explosion is not obsolete in this act. In crowded spaces there are fewer better, but compared to the likes of Bone Spear and Skeletons, Poison acts as a much better companion to it, at least as of right now. Going forwards, we'll see how it shapes up as enemy resistances get higher, but it gets the job done well. Pats on the back all around in the Trav. Also, this would have been nice for a Boazon now, wouldn't it? I almost wanted to go for an Act 1 mercenary when I found this, but considering that the only reason I have my mercenary with me is the crushing blow, and considering that that is the only good offensive stat that this thing lacks, there's just no point. Plus the amp damage would be constantly cancelling my lower res, especially in fights against Mephisto. This is where the aforementioned crushing blow pays off, but Mephi is a much frailer target, so I wouldn't be surprised if we'd be okay without it. Also, quite like Diablo, he seems to lose his scariness as the difficulty increases as well, because unlike normal Mephisto, I was never in danger of dying and my resistances are not that even good. Hell, my mercenary even survived with only the use of one health potion, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the importance of defensive skills like Clay Golem. It puts in work. By the way, don't you love it when you play through the Chaos Sanctuary just to realize that you forgot to press record so you have to do it all over again? I love that. Anyways, both times I did the CS with the Necro, I was quite confident on my AoE skills, doing well bar one problem. Pit Lords are now immune to poison. Yup, straight up take no damage. Now, lower res does break their immunity, but not to the point where poison attacks do significant damage anyways. This is where the value in skilling lower res is, I guess. However, for now we have to deal with the hand that we've been dealt, and that did lead to a situation like this with the Infector and his boys. Me just saving up some corpses beforehand so as to, when it comes time to face the scary guys, I can just take them down with fire and physical damage, which is quite effective against them. Still, even though I was able to take the boss version of these guys, Pit Lords in general in the CS were a bit of a pain. It meant that I had to conserve corpses at every step, for if I were to run into a pack of Pit Lords, I would have not been able to damage them otherwise. I can only imagine this getting worse in hell, but we'll get to it when we get to it. For now, anything that was not a Pit Lord was free real estate for my Poison Nova spores to rest on, and that included the likes of Decise and Grand Vizier and their respective packs. Just don't almost die to Vizier. That is always embarrassing. Now I think you people are in the know enough that you can guess that against Diablo, my mercenary was the MVP. His crushing blows, even still coming from his scythe bought in Act 2 normal, pay huge dividends. I mean, that is just how good that stat is. Speaking of good things, Poison Nova does do good here too. My mercenary died when Diablo had a little over quarter of his HP left, and Nova was able to take him down with lower res and golem support. The drops here were horrible because this was the second time I had killed Diablo, and Diablo runs are always trash. Unless you want to find skillers, of course. +1 to shapeshifting with 37% goal find for that goal finding wolf druid that you're never going to make. It puts in work. Wait, what? Now Act 5 is where power creep really starts to show its full effect against our radioactive friend. It is at this point at the game where poison resists and immunes have started popping up during day-to-day activities, and they can be quite disruptive. Not to mention, your golem and mercenary are often long dead by the point you get to them, so not only are those a problem offensively, but projectile monsters like these ones pack quite a big elemental punch that may lead to unfortunate accidents. On a much cheerier note, monsters that do take damage from poison do still melt under lower res and poison nova, as shown by the Frozenstein pack. Now yes, Corpse Explosion helped a lot in this fight. Don't know if you know, for Corpse Explosion to get going, you need a corpse first. And that's what Poison Nova has been getting us quite consistently. That's why going into the Ancients fight I was rightfully scared. I always am of these guys, but this time their rolls were actually really friendly, with Talik and Korlik both having the negligible and forgettable teleportation trait. What Madoc had I didn't really want to find out, but thankfully it wasn't cursed or might aura, which is why on my focused attack with the mercenary and lower res plus poison nova I was able to take him down first without dying. Now in return the brothers took out my mercenary, but in the process Korlik had taken a heavy denting from my attacks as well, so I focused on him next. Using the clay golem as bait, I unleashed poison nova on him, and after he was down, Talik was the last in line. Again, Poison Nova is by no means a good single target skill, but with damage touching 2.5k at this point, plus lower res, it definitely doesn't do a bad job either. Where it does do a bad job is against Wave 4. This is where we see the bias of Blizzard towards some elements and very much against some others, and Poison is unfortunately one of the some others. You may recall that it was at this point for my Fire Sorceress as well as to when her damage really started to lag behind. I mean, with this guy that is happening, but this is really just a case of immunes. Even with all the corpses I could accumulate by running outside and killing champions, these guys were just not going down. Thus I decided to teleport away, which often loses their attention because, well, they're dumb and don't know how magic works. Wave 5, however, was a more accurate picture of what I was talking about before, power creep. You can see that even though Poison Nova is doing damage, it's not a lot. My mercenary and golem are nowhere to be seen, and thus the potion slots on my belt are swiftly running out because Blizzard were just not kind towards poison damage. Thankfully they were kind towards one particular skill, which almost makes up for all of this. Almost. Yeah, but still. Towards the end of this difficulty we have seen some gaping holes in our guy's game, which include not being the best at killing single targets, and heavily relying on luck and the mercy of the monster you're fighting to let the mercenary live long enough to land enough crushing blows. That's why I will be doing a bit of leveling spree here. After I kill Bale, I will be doing a bunch of Bale runs to get around to level 70, where I can put more points into skills that I think are going to be helpful for Hell, and maybe try to gear up myself and my mercenary maybe a bit more. Now, like I mentioned, I only expected to level here and not find anything of particular value, which is why I didn't record most of the runs neither. Well, it turns out I ended up finding a Guillaume's face from Colenso and his little boys. Now that in itself is a fantastic find, but it becomes even better when you see what I found just one run before. Yup, Kelpie Snare. Now, I had reservations about this item because it lacked crushing blow versus my strengths, but now? Oh, and along with Hawkmail, which I also found 2 runs back, my mercenary is pretty much completely decked out. This is why I love mini playthroughs as well. On a Grail or something, this would have just been like my 15th G phase probably, and you know, who cares, right? On mini playthroughs, you feel the upgrade. I mean, just look how well the 75% slow target and the crushing blow work against Bale here. Beautiful. Now you may also notice a few revives in the mix here as well. That's gonna be my plan going into Hell. Speaking of, to prepare myself further, I partook in an activity from bygone days, running Nightmare LK to get some gold and then gambling at Anya. Remember when I used to do that? I remember. It's awesome for casters, and since this guy benefits massively from plus skills, I decided to give it a shot here. With that preparation done, I stepped into said hell, and this was my gear for the difficulty. Now for the weapon, I went with the white wand yet again. Pretty much all Necros use this for Nightmare on up because it is pretty much best in slot on a budget. You may also notice though that I have changed out my clay golem wand and instead decided to build another one in my +3 to corpse explosion base. That's because instead of clay golem I will be using revives as defensive meat shields, and corpse explosion is just awesome, so there. For my helmet I still stuck with lore. Now there was some temptation to try to gamble for a rare circlet / coronet with necro skills, but the best that I could have hoped for would have been +3 to poison and bone skills. Compared to that, I honestly think that I do get a little bit more mileage out of lore because it helps me out in all areas. Curses, summons, and poison and bone as well, thus helping me with damage, survivability, and 32 lightning res add to the latter. What also adds to the latter is the body armor, which is unchanged from Nightmare, Smoke. Now generally you see me rocking bone on this guy by this point, and honestly that's the only reason I decided not to go for it. That and, farming runes takes a while, whereas with Smoke, yes, I do miss out on those plus skills which are very important for the Necro as mentioned before, but I gain faster hit recovery and additional 20 all res compared to Sol which helps me ditch Ancient's Pledge for a Necro head shield. We'll get to it later though, because right now we're looking at the jewelry which is all dedicated to FCR. Though by looking at it, you won't be able to tell that I tried my damnness to upgrade it. This amulet is the same, and still pretty nice for normal tower. This ring is the same, and this ring, yeah, this is the only upgrade I could get. Video game be hard sometimes, but it still works. I mean, this as an upgrade is pretty cool with FCR, good mana bonus, and fire res as well. Speaking of upgrades, I also did some Charcy shopping and got some upgrades on my boots, belt, and gloves. They're nothing special, but they give me the 3 important resistances, lightning, cold, and fire respectively, with some additional mods like 40 faster run walk on the boots and the ability to get 4 rows of potions on the belt, which is what matters. Speaking of what matters, this Necro head. Yes, this is the exact same Necro head from Nightmare, +3 to Poison Nova, which is socketed and put Shale and Eth in for rhyme. People with eagle eyes would have noticed that I already used both my socket quests previously, so I'm technically counting this as the hand-down item from my Holy Grail. Although I didn't really end up using the first socket quest since I'm using the CE wand, which had sockets anyways, but I digress. This though is really more than enough. Plus skills are really all this guy needs, and the combination of this plus smoke ends up providing me with more damage versus bone plus Ancient's Pledge, which is what I would have needed for similar res figures as well. I mean, yes, if I wanted to, I could have handed myself down something like a homunculus, but I really didn't feel the need to. This Necro is a strong independent hell ass kicker anyways, which you will see. He gets that liberty by having some really nice resistances starting hell. Rhyme for sure isn't the best res-wise. 2p diamonds would have provided me more, but the cannot be frozen and magic find tipped me towards it, and the res penalty is not that severe neither. It is further helped by my charms, which as you can see contribute resistances, faster hit recovery, and a little bit of life towards the cause. Finally, my damage figure of Poison Nova is pretty impressive as well, 2.7 to 2.9k. The problem really in Hell, as with most elements, is the immunities that you have to dodge, because otherwise poison damage still does work, especially with just having one hard point in skills like lower res. Since we have started talking about the skills, looking in the poison and bone tree, you can see that I have maxed out Poison Nova, which shall surprise no one. This is, after all, the Poison Necro, and this is his main form of offense. You know, until he gets a corpse. To use said corpse, we have 2 options. The first is my favorite skill in the game, Corpse Explosion. Doesn't care about how much damage you do, how bulky the monsters are, or how they resist poison, it just wrecks stuff. Second option resides in the summoning spell tree, and it is Revive. Now if you remember my summoner playthrough, you may remember me raving about this skill non-stop in hell, and yeah, in this difficulty is where it really starts to shine, because it is in this difficulty that the monsters really start to shine as well. However, just because I have 5 hard points into this, bumping it up to 6 with plus skills, it doesn't make me a Summon-mancer. My main damage still comes from Poison Nova. Revive is just an incredibly well-balanced skill in the fact that it can be used super effectively, like reviving ogres for crushing blow against bosses. However, just in regular play, revives disappear and despawn constantly, making you revive more and different types of monsters constantly as well. Take this for example. It is incredibly difficult to revive some monsters in cold plains and take them all the way to Black Marsh because A, you'll despawn them if you go way too fast because they don't rubber band. B, you'll despawn them if you go too slow because they only have unlimited timer on them. Plus C, you probably want to revive new and more awesome monsters by the time you get to Black Marsh anyway, and I think that's what makes this skill awesome, and kinda like Corpse Explosion, a must-have in any Necro's tool belt. Now with all that being said, Clay Golem is still an integral part of my attack plan. Yes, going all in on it like I did in Nightmare doesn't seem the best with monsters being so much stronger now, but it can still be used for the initial distraction. It gives me enough time to lay down a lower res curse, Poison Nova the monsters, and get the first elusive corpse. The revived army, as you can see, mostly just helps my mercenary tank damage because he is a very important part of my attack. To see how, let's go to the Andariel fight. Now for my revives, I just had a bunch of goons I picked up along in Act 1 because you can't really get ogres for crushing blow till Act 2. Here my revives are really just working as described before, distracting Andariel so that the mercenary doesn't take all the hits. Why is that important? Well, you see all this damage that Poison Nova is doing against the Poison Queen with very high poison resistance? Yeah, Poison Nova is doing nothing. This is literally all mercenary. Don't believe me? Watch the end of the fight where I stopped using Poison Nova and Andariel still keeps getting heavily damaged. G-Face is one hell of a helmet, I tell ya. Maggot Lair isn't that much of a hoot with this guy though, because not only are you facing down poison immune monsters in the aforementioned maggots, but also narrow corridors are not really your friend when your two main forms of offense are Poison Nova and a bunch of enemies you revived after killing them. Thus for this part I generally like to keep a bit of gold spare so that I can pretty freely teleport through this part. Though even when I got to the chest room, things were still really messy. I had to rely on my mercenary and revives for damage, and of course, Corpse Explosion to finish things off. A place where things got really messy though was Radaman's lair. This place is also packed with poison immunes, and they hurt. Thankfully, by killing a bunch of not those guys that just shredded my face, I was able to acquire a rare amulet, which was literally the first upgrade to my amulet that I had found since normal tower. Imagine if this thing, by the way, had +2 to poison and bone skills. Still, it did offer me FCR and a bit more res, so it was better, but respect to this magic amulet. 2021 to 2021, it lived longer than I thought. Then we get to the fun part, ogres. The single most reason the skill Revive is one of the best skills in the game. My tomb yet again had ogres and I spared no expense, got 5 of these bad boys in my party and went on to take Duriel. Well, I didn't take on Duriel per se. Well, I guess I'm not doing anything for a while here as you can see, so yeah, what have you been up to? Oh yeah, right, let's talk about Diablo 2 Resurrected. I know a few of you may be curious as to what my reaction is to that, so here goes. I'm really happy for the people that wanted something like a Diablo 2 remastered. Let's be honest, there were a fair few that were held back due to the old and 800 by 600 graphics and never enjoyed the pleasure of being a necromancer and, just standing there while your revives and mercenary do the job for you. Oh, I also use Decrepify here too because, well, I had it and I was bored, I guess. So yeah, back to topic. I'm not one of those people. Clearly, people like me don't mind this game's graphical limitations, which is why we play it right now. See, with people like me and Diablo 2, it's like I'm dating a girl for like 20 years. Oh, Duriel is dead. Well, we'll get back to this analogy after this short break. For now, we gotta take on Act 3. Now, if I didn't think revives were OP before Act 3, well, here I got to see a couple of little dudes and a bird kick the shit out of living giant trees. I mean, sure they had a support from a crazy white-haired poison-radiating man, but god damn, my point still stands. It is only glorified further in the Travincal fight, where the council was demolished by my troops and poisonous bits too, I guess. Honestly, this guy feels like a better Summonmancer than my Summonmancer, more than a Poison Necro. Which sounds weird, I know, but really, he pretty much fixes the gaps that the Summonmancer had, which was mostly some lacking damage against multiple targets, and Poison Nova plus lower res takes care of that pretty well with the revives and the mercenary. For single targets, of course, you know what route we take. So yeah, the analogy. Picture Diablo 2 as this girl that we've been dating for a while now, and 21 years later, suddenly she's decided to get a nose job. I mean, that's what this is, right? Diablo 2 is getting a nose job, just looking prettier to rekindle the fire with its current players and maybe attract more new ones at the same time. Boy, that fight didn't take that long. Guess my analogy will have to wait a bit longer because Act 4 is going to be no joke. So, like I said, Act 4 is by no definition easy, but it definitely is easier to get through if you get no souls in the plains of despair. What makes it not so easy is a plethora of other monsters present in the area, many of which are poison resistant or immune. At this stage of the game, poison is no longer a good offensive typing as many bulky monsters resist it, which can be seen in the easy fight. Once you get the first corpse though, things topple like out of control, but you do need a good chunk of help from your mercenary and revives to get the show started. Of course, those revives can be used defensively as well, as can be shown by this example where running from a cursed Holy Fire Hephasto, my revived marauders just made a wall in front of me, behind which I could tuck snugly and fire off poison novas and curses. What you can also see in this clip are some of those poison immune mobs I was talking about before and how much more difficult they are to KO than even something like the hammer guy himself. The revives do help with damage, but really at this stage the mercenary is the guy with the most amount of DPS, so it is often all on him to get the first corpse. So you can see why it would be a problem when I didn't have the goal to revive him for the Chaos Sanctuary. I still made it work though. For Infector, I pre-prepared some Pit Lord corpses before luring him in and then exploding them to get their health down right from the get-go. Then as you can see, Poison Nova does take a little bit of time to get the job done. Thankfully in Hell these guys are fire immune instead of poison immune, which does help out, and thus I was able to finish them off one corpse at a time. With that, the other two are not that big of a problem. That's because they're both rather frail. Thankfully the monster type of Lord Desais and Grand Vizier are not particularly poison resistant / have high HP, so taking them down was not too much trouble at all. Speaking of not much trouble, for the Diablo fight I went to get some ogres. For these guys I like to search the following areas. The River of Flame, because as you saw in the Hellforge fight, they can spawn here. If I can't find any here, I like to go back to the Arcane and go to the palace through the portal. Here also, they spawn quite frequently, and that's where I got them. If not, I would have gone into the tombs at the end of Act 2, since they can also spawn inside those as well. Finally, where were we again? Right, nose jobs. Now, the thing that I was talking about before is that Diablo 2 is getting a nose job, and yes, that is exciting, but think about it this way. 2 years down the road, when you turn to play the game, you'll still be playing the same game that you are today and have been for 21 years, just with a prettier nose. Is that enough for you? For a lot of people it is. For them, this is pretty much all they were looking for in the past 21 years. For me, Diablo is dead, which means it is time to buckle up and take on Act 5. Now, Act 5 is one tough cookie to crack. On one side, you can have monsters with insane damage output and poison resistances and immunities galore, but you can just as easily reset and get a roll your Necro can deal with and go forth. Deal with most things except for the toughest rolls in the game. That's right, prison doors. In all seriousness though, Act 5 did give some grief as I had low gold throughout the act and found myself going through areas with no mercenary on multiple occasions. Now I could have done some LK runs to fix that right up, but I decided to go forth like in the Ancients fight. While recruiting some very much needed ogres in the palace, our group got cursed by a boss pack and my mercenary was the one we had to give up. Now it looked like it was almost all ogre. Actually, that's what it was, because I had no gold left, and for the ancient fight it was 3 barbarians against these big black Solomon Grundies and my puny little radioactive man. Turns out, little radioactive man did really well for himself. Fights like these make you think that, yeah, maybe revive is too good of a skill. I mean, just look at the damage. It is super good. Not to mention, I never have to worry about the bulk of these guys either. The only restriction between this being a surefire victory and a complete train wreck was the time limit on these guys. One of the reasons I just settled on getting only 5 of them. Well, it did start out super well with Coralic dying within seconds, succumbing to the ogres and then the poison attacks by my Necro. Talik and Madoc did dance around for a while, which did make me nervous because as the clock ticked down, the ogres started falling down as well. Now, due to the nice AoE from lower res plus Poison Nova, you can see that I had done some residual damage on both the barbarians already, which was nice. What I was really worried about was the state of my defenses without the revives, because they were the reason that I didn't have to worry about the melee damage coming from Talik and Madoc till now. Thankfully, the melee damage from Talik died with him, so there was only one target left, Madoc. Now, because of his low HP and the damage I had already done to him, I was not really worried. Even if the revives timer ran out, which as you can see it did near the end, Poison Nova and lower res should be a KO soon, and Clay Golem was able to defend me in the meantime. That felt, honestly, really good. To actually win such a huge battle without the help of my mercenary, which I feel like had been carrying me through a lot of situations. Thus, of course, I decided to get him back, and for it I did some Hell LK runs. These do pay out really well because player 7 drops really nice and high level stuff. They can also end very bad on the other side of the spectrum as well, because on player 7 the monsters do very nice damage and are also very high level stuff. Thankfully it took like 15 runs to get 1,000,000 gold with this method, and I went to the throne, which I was able to clear even with there being 2 out of 3 monster types which were poison immune. See what I mean about the mercenary carrying me through these situations? Nothing could carry me through wave 4 though. I mean, maybe an ogre army plus my mercenary plus lower res and corpse explosion could have, but I didn't really see much point in assembling one right before the Bale fight, because I would have had to repeat it again, and thus I just decided to lure these poison immune guys out. The guys that weren't poison immune, aka wave 5, actually were much more handleable. I revived the Eldritch pack for this fight, and with the Mercenary and Poison Nova, I was doing some decent damage to them. The drawback in the damage here is shown by Corpse Explosion of all skills, because these guys are just insanely physically bulky and also straight up fire immune. But it's Corpse Explosion. You may be tanky and that's cute, but this is Corpse Explosion we're talking about here, okay? It gets the job done no matter what. Thus, with that, we come to the final Bill fight after reviving the ogres sequence. I'm not one of those guys. Yes, we're talking about the nose job again. Don't get me wrong, I do like nose jobs, but just generally I'm very much opposed to the remake culture, and that's just me, right? That's my opinion about how the past should stay in the past, and in the future we should focus on newer and better things, like hoping Diablo 4 isn't shit. But that's just how I like to view life, and I completely understand if there is a majority that doesn't resonate with me on this. Now that being said, will I be playing Diablo 2 Resurrected? Absolutely yes. It's not something I wanted or was excited for, but since we are getting it, I shall be playing it. If anything, I feel like I made a huge mistake in 2020 by not pouncing on D2 mods like Project Diablo 2 and Path of Diablo, and that really stunted my channel growth and my overall motivation to make videos, and I don't want to repeat that mistake with D2 Resurrected, so get this. Whenever the remake is released in 2021, I promise to upload a mini playthrough of that game within 1 month of release. No excuses. For now, I do want to try out Project Diablo 2 finally, but do let me know if that thing is relevant anymore, or if there's anything else you want me to make a video about. Finally, I hope you find this content riveting. Yours truly, with love.